Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I am super pumped for today's show. We have Lee Wheeler-Berliner in-house with us, the Director of Colorado Workforce Development Council and a monthly contributor to the Connect and Collaborate Network. Very excited to have you back with us, Lee. How have you been?
It's been doing great. Thanks so much, Alex. It's great to be back here with you.
Yes, as always, and you bring me great people, and this show is... holds no bars for any of the others that we have. I'm excited because we finished this legislative session, and it was
Correct.
a bit of a contentious one, to say the least. But exciting stuff on the forefront, particularly for education, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
excited to dig into that.
Awesome. But before we do that, what else do you guys have going on?
Yeah, so June is shaping up to be an exciting month for the Colorado Workforce Development Council. There's several events that are happening throughout the state. Kicking off today in Denver is the Global Minded Conference, and it's running June 5th through June 7th. And it's a great event that really helps first generation and underrepresented college students achieve career success. It helps connect them with professional networks, mentors, skills, resources, and experiential learning opportunities and other social supports to ensure that people can go to higher education and succeed and stay in higher education, which is critically important. So that's the beginning of the month. As we look towards the end of the month, one of the things that we haven't talked about much on this show is that the Colorado Workforce Development Council has a partnership with the Economic Development Council of Colorado, and we work with them on several fronts, and they host regional forums during the year. And so they have a regional forum down in Pueblo on June 27th. And so at that event, they'll be talking with local leaders and economic developers about opportunity zones, adaptive reuse of buildings and lands, employee ownership programs, and workforce development as well. So really excited about that. And as you've heard, our initiative around Lives Empowered and working with the retail sectors and the retail work really continues. So we're excited about that launch right now.
Awesome. That
Yeah.
is a really exciting one. We've talked a couple of times on it here, but I'm excited to revisit and see how that's working out for you.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And as you said, today we're excited to really reflect on the legislative session. So for those who may not be fully aware, the legislative session in Colorado happens every year. It starts in January and then ends in early May. And every year is something a little bit different as we think about the laws that really shape our state and help drive things in a variety of fashions. And so today I'm pleased to introduce two guests, Representative Dominique Jackson from District 42 and Pat Teegarden from the Department of Labor and Employment. So Dominique, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Thanks. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So I am just a regular person who has had the same sort of struggles in life as everybody else, and knew how to make change and advocate for myself in my own life, and got to the point where basically I got angry enough about the way that the world was working and knew that I had the skill set in which to make change for everybody else. I am but my neighbors are but me. We're all the same folks with the same kinds of problems. So decided to give it a shot and run for the state legislature, and I am in my second term, so it's pretty exciting.
Okay, excellent.
Congrats. Yeah, and you are with District 42. What's in District 42?
So District 42 is in Aurora. Sorry, get a little excited about Aurora. So it is on the Denver border, like Lowry, and then Colfax is the northern border. Then it goes all the way south at one point, almost to Iliff, so to Jewel, to Chambers, and then back down. So it's a very, very, very diverse district in every way, shape, or form, and I absolutely love it.
Okay, excellent.
Awesome.
And Pat, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, hi, and thanks, Lee. And it's good to sort of be with you, Representative Jackson, even though I'm connecting by phone. I am the Director of Policy and Legislation here at the Department of Labor and Employment, which means a variety of different things. I've been working at the federal, state, and local levels of government most of my career. I've been in and out of government at the federal, state, and local levels in both private sector and in government. And I am an attorney by training, although that is not nearly as essential as the policy background for purposes of the work I do with labor and employment now. And I would say that my primary and highest calling is working with Representative Jackson and her 99 colleagues at the Colorado State General Assembly on key issues every legislative session, as well as doing constituent outreach.
We're so happy that you're there, too.
Thank you, Representative.
All right. So, Representative Jackson, let's go to you. As Pat just mentioned, there are 100 members of the General Assembly, and you are one of a small few that is also a member of the Colorado Workforce Development Council. You've been appointed to represent the House on the council. Can you tell us a little bit about what is entailed in your role as a representative? What does daily life look like in the General Assembly?
Wow. So making policy comes from a lot of different places. For me, it tends to be community driven. So sometimes it comes from literally people calling me, emailing me, or me knocking on people's doors and them telling me about what's going on in their world. A lot of times policy ideas come from issues, obviously, things that are happening in community, problems that need to be solved, sometimes from nonprofit organizations and other organizations that spend a lot of time out in the field also talking to people. While I represent Aurora and Aurora's House District 42, Colorado is my home. And I care about every single corner of this state. So I personally also spend a lot of time visiting all around the state and talking to people about all kinds of different issues. So that's how ideas sort of bubble up. And then you bring those people together and you have stakeholder engagement and everybody talks about their ideas. And trust me, we're not all on the same side all the time, nor do we all have the same ideas as to how to fix a particular problem. But you bring together the best ideas that you possibly can. We have incredible attorneys and policy staff at the state, and they help us actually write the legislation. Then we spend a lot of time presenting it in committees, and that's when people get to come and testify and be a bigger part of the process, get it out of committee. There's amendments, you have to be nimble. You have to be ready for pretty much anything. The whole point is to be able to be open, to listen, in order to make the best policy possible that is truly going to benefit the people of the state of Colorado. But it's a long process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. You mentioned this a little bit about your introduction, but how did you become involved with state government?
So I knew some people who were elected officials, but my background, well, I'm from Colorado. I spent 20 years actually as a journalist. And so, serving community has always been part of sort of my DNA. And because of that, I have a natural curiosity and I sort of know how to find answers. But I am, as I said, a regular person. And I am a woman, and I'm a black woman, and I am a woman who has not come from generational wealth. And so every single thing that I have accomplished in my life, I've been able to do because of a willingness, I guess, in which to do so. I mean, I'm the first of my mother's children to graduate from college, let alone go to graduate school. So I have had the same kinds of traumas and trials and tribulations as everybody else. And I knew that I could make a difference. I knew that I could, because I have the same lived experience as a lot of the people in this state and a lot of the people that I represent, I knew I could go to the Capitol and be a different voice and advocate for things that not everybody else was talking about.
Okay, excellent. And I know in the papers towards the end of the session, especially, there were talks of very late nights, very early mornings.
Had a few of those.
Long, hard work. What is it that keeps you excited daily, and what gets you going and gives you that energy to be part of the legislature?
Well, it's a privilege, for one thing. It's an honor. And it's people. It's when somebody calls you up and says, I was able to do X because of this particular piece of legislation. And it may have been one of my bills, it may have been one of my colleagues' bills or something, because we all work together. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not your particular bill, you have a role, you have a large role. And we help each other craft the best policy that we possibly can. So that's the beautiful thing about it. I will tell you, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, in the moment and doing the work, while it is a privilege and I'm not complaining, it is hard. It is so difficult. It's emotionally draining. It's physically draining. I mean, you don't eat. You sit all the time. And it's stressful. And so those wins, those moments of joy are brief and short-lived. And then it's right back to, sometimes some vitriol, divisiveness, and some serious negativity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, thank you for the work that you do and for your efforts in this past session. Pat, let's go to you. Could you share a little bit about your role as the Director of Policy and Legislation for the Department of Labor and Employment?
Sure. I'm listening to Representative Jackson. Oops, excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm listening to Representative Jackson, thinking that means those of us who have jobs like mine with various agencies need to work harder to make sure we're getting some of the workload picked up for members of the General Assembly. It's difficult, and as we go through the conversation, I might jump back in with some more. I think the most important thing to say about the role doing legislative and policy advocacy on behalf of the state agency is keeping in mind that it's the General Assembly that makes public policy, and that's often an issue that I think those of us that work for state agencies need to keep very carefully in mind. So while sometimes working with the governor and the governor's legislative team, we will bring forward bills which we specifically want to advocate, we do so in a collaborative and I don't want to say deferential might not be the right word, but certainly in a very collaborative fashion, recognizing that it's Representative Jackson and her colleagues who are actually deciding what ultimately goes into bills. So we provide technical background, and then try to stay in our lane.
Okay, sounds good. Now, Representative Jackson, you mentioned committees, where a lot of the hard work happens there. Which committees have you been a part of most recently?
Well, I currently serve on the Health and Insurance Committee, and I've been on that committee in the 3 years that I have been a legislator. It used to be called Health Insurance and Environment. I previously served on the Transportation and Energy Committee, and I also previously served on the Agriculture, Livestock, and Natural Resources Committee, and you'll hear the emphasis on those other three entities because I now chair the new committee that is Energy and Environment. So Natural Resources, Energy, and Environment were all combined into one committee, which I now chair.
Okay, excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about how the work of those committees impacts or intersects with workforce issues in the state of Colorado?
Well, I would say that for me personally, serving on Colorado Workforce Development, I look at everything through a workforce sort of lens. And whether it's sitting on the health committee and thinking about what employers are paying for their health care, what employees are paying for their health care, what it means to have a healthy workforce, the intersectionality between behavioral health care and work readiness to moving into a clean energy environment and a just transition, and how do we develop the workforce for tomorrow? I mean, so pretty much everything we do, I think, has an impact. Whether it's from, I work a lot on housing issues, so having a safe and affordable place to live is sort of the cornerstone to becoming self-sufficient, and being able to have a home that's safe and that you can afford. You kind of need that in order to have a good job. You sort of need that in order to get to transportation, in order to get to your job. Your kids sort of need that in order to study, in order to prepare themselves for their future. So there's an intersectionality in everything we do.
Okay, great. You mentioned transitions to renewable energy and kind of different dynamics. Affordable housing is definitely something that has been on our minds and a part of conversations recently. What do you think are the most pressing challenges that are facing Colorado related to our workforce, and what can legislators such as yourself really do to address those challenges?
I think that there's a multitude of challenges. Not every kid is destined college is great, but not every kid is destined for college, and I think that we need to find some more creative and innovative ways in which to prepare our kids. I want to see our kids staying in their communities, and that includes our rural communities and our mountain communities. We need to make sure that all of our communities are thriving and not just surviving. And it's not just kids. I mean, I still worry about, the recession and the people that were looking for jobs that maybe stopped looking for jobs. And what exactly has happened to them, and are they fully employed? I think about minimum wage and the wages that we're paying people. I think about how to involve our business, how much I'm not always involved in the conversations as it relates to our educators in our universities, in our community colleges, and our business community, and making sure that we are changing our curriculum in a way to keep up with what our changing needs are. We have lots of incredible opportunities as it relates to booming industries such as aerospace, for instance, and space exploration, and there's just so much. We are an incredibly beautiful, wonderful, wealthy in our minds kind of state. And we have lots of opportunity, and I just want to make sure that we are taking advantage of all of those opportunities, and that we are all in the conversation, that we're all working together.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, in this current economic environment, the labor force is pretty tight. And one of the things we see is that there are people who may need some supports to stay in the labor force, but the labor for those industries is actually really hard to find. So just last week, or rather last month in May, the CWDC was down in La Junta, Colorado, and we had one of our regular meetings, and we heard from the director of their behavioral health center. And in southeastern Colorado, you have a lot of people who are in need of behavioral health supports, whether it's substance abuse or various disorders, addictions. And yet, as an employer, his health center really struggles to find the right type of people who can step into those roles. And we engage in a fascinating dialogue about how we support businesses throughout the state to find the right talent, to get them connected, and to work through some of those issues. Occupational licensing came up as one of those barriers where sometimes there's a piece of paper that says you have to have such and such a credential to do this job, and you can't find people like that in that community. Have you taken on that issue in any way? How do you see occupational licensing intersecting with some of these concepts by chance?
Well, I think that we need to find more opportunities. I ran a bill this session. I found out that a group out of Colorado Springs contacted me simply because there is a shortage of certified sign language interpreters. And so we needed to create a way in which more people could become certified as sign language interpreters. And the reason that certification is important is because people were, being in emergency rooms and talking to their doctors and getting wrong information. Sign language is a language like any other language. People were appearing before judges. People were going to parent-teacher conferences. I mean, I didn't know the kinds of obstacles that people were facing, and that there was a backlog of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who want to do this work. And sign language interpreters, certified sign language interpreters, can only work a couple of hours before another interpreter needs to come on board. So anyway, there's just lots of pockets of opportunity that we really don't even think about, that where there's a great need. And so now there's going to be more people that are going to be able to be certified as sign language interpreters. And for the deaf and hard of hearing community, it's huge, and it's huge also in their own workforce development opportunities. So anyway,
okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Pat, I want to go back to you. And you said it very eloquently earlier that it's the General Assembly that is creating the laws and creating the policies. And within the executive branch, as someone from a state agency, you look at that implementation side. Can you tell us a little bit about what those steps look like when the new laws are passed, the new bills are signed? What happens then as you help guide that to implementation and to actually make change on the ground?
Thanks, Lee. That's a very good question. I think in addition to the fact that, we work closely with the legislature on, bringing forward proposals that we may identify in terms of unmet need out there, we also have a responsibility on the other end, and we're in the midst of that right now as we jump into the deep end of implementation, of making sure that not only that bills that pass get implemented, but that we're following in the spirit with which they were intended as legislators passed them. A perfect example is the one Representative Jackson just mentioned with regard to just transition, which I think went through your committee, didn't it?
It did.
Yes, and that is going to be, as an example, a big lift for us, because with the reduction in carbon emissions, which is on the horizon, and the looming switch from coal-fired power plants to natural gas and to renewable energy sources for power plants, there's also going to be an economic dislocation for people that have been involved in the coal industry traditionally in terms of providing the fuel source for those power plants. So that's one that we're going to be working very closely with Representative Jackson's committee, with the bill sponsors, with not only organized labor and others on the employee side of things, but also with the employer community and with the environmental community, to make sure that we're knitting the different pieces together in a fashion which, like I said, implements the bill from a step-by-step basis in terms of our agency and the creation of a new Office of Just Transition and the creation of a new task force and the preparation and research to put into a report, which we then provide back to the General Assembly in a timely fashion over the next year and a half. I hope that made some sense.
Well,
the real work begins now that the legislature's done.
Right. And I might add, too, we don't do these things in a vacuum, in that we work with our state agencies. When I was talking about that whole stakeholder process, the agencies that have to implement these policies are very much at the table, because we have to obviously make sure that they're going to be able to accomplish the work that we hope that they're going to be able to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And how do you see businesses fitting into that? You talk about agencies being a stakeholder. What is the role of really businesses and private employers in the lawmaking process?
Everything. I mean, Colorado is known as an entrepreneurial state. And so we have some of the greatest minds here, whether they're corporate entities or whether they're small businesses. And we have to engage absolutely everybody. Everybody has to be at the table. And when I talk about great minds, I mean great minds. I mean, people have creative solutions and wonderful ideas as to how we can accomplish the things in the most prudent way, and that are going to be to the greatest benefit to the people of the state of Colorado.
Awesome. Very well said. I am certainly appreciating this conversation, seeing how everything works together, which is one of my favorite things that we do with the show. Just seeing those checks and balances, right? Your government is working for you, and I like to be able to deliver that message.
Right. And I think the bill we talked about is a great example of how there is a focus on ensuring there are not unintended consequences. Because anytime you have a really good idea that a lot of people believe in, that doesn't mean there can't be negative impacts to other folks as a part of that. And I think this is an example where we're saying, what are all the sides we need to look at, and how do we balance that out moving forward?
100%. We have to take a quick break here on Connect and Collaborate, so stay with us. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here, and we will be right back. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I'm having a wonderful conversation here with Lee Wheeler-Berliner from Colorado Workforce Development Council and Colorado Representative Dominique Jackson with District 42. So exciting stuff that we've got going on. We know the legislative session ended at the beginning of last month. And I'm learning some checks and balances here and how things work, and how policy really gets distributed first with working with your organizations, your state departments, if you will, and then also when we bring business on board and how that works in all of the process, if you will. And boy, is it a process.
It is, absolutely, Alex. There's definitely a lot that goes into the act of making legislation, and I think even though the session is just a little over 4 months, the work is definitely year-round. So if you look at the entire life cycle of a new bill, from the idea and the inception to getting it introduced and written and put through committee and then signed and then implemented, there's a whole lot of people and a whole lot of players involved.
Oh, 100%. And unfortunately, we did lose Pat Teegarden again with the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. He had an emergency in the department that he had to go. But we appreciated his time, and we still have Representative Jackson here with us to talk.
Very happy to be here.
Yes, very happy to have you.
Yeah. So Representative Jackson, let's just dig into a little bit about what happened this past legislative session. You've shared some in the first segment, but what were your key areas of focus during the session?
So I focused a lot on housing. Is an area that I focus on a lot. We have an affordable housing crisis here in the state of Colorado, and we have different needs across different communities. You know, the metro areas is one thing, but we have, there's urban and suburban, and then rural and mountain communities, and everybody has different needs as it relates to housing. Not just talking about rental housing, although rental housing is, of course, very important, but I believe in building communities and creating communities, and I believe that, access to becoming a homeowner is a way to help to instill that sense of community. So housing is an area of focus for me. I serve on the Health and Health Insurance Committee, so I do a lot of healthcare legislation. I'm the consumer on the committee. You know, when you get your committee assignments, the speaker makes those assignments, and they can change depending upon what's going on each session. But I have served on health since I was first elected, and I am sort of the consumer advocate. I am the regular person on that committee, as opposed to, we have pharmacists and we have pediatricians and ER docs and people who are experts in Medicare and Medicaid and things like that. So worked a lot on a lot of healthcare policy, particularly as it relates to drug costs and prescription drug costs. And do a lot of that. Let's see, I've worked on a lot of transportation. I do also a lot of sort of victims' rights advocacy kinds of legislation as well. And then, of course, energy policy and environmental policy. As I have mentioned, I am chair of the Energy and Environment Committee. So that's a lot of the policy that I particularly do. And it's fascinating. It's all fascinating.
I have so many questions for you that we're going to have to ask off air. I don't want to put you on the spot too much as it relates to CWDC. I know we have one focus here. But I actually, if you don't mind, I do have one question particularly.
Please. Sure.
When it comes to the healthcare and insurance, you had a few bills that recently passed in transparency.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you feel about that? Good or bad for you?
Transparency is important. So I ran a bill that I have run a couple of years that actually a lot of different things happened. And it's a bill that I'm going to be bringing back next session. We got down to the wire on it, and it was a prescription drug price transparency bill. Looking through the entire supply chain, because it's not just about big pharma. It's about pharmacy benefit management companies and insurers and even nonprofits that offer up coupons and whatnot for pharmaceutical costs. So, transparency is not a bad word. Transparency for us, for me, at least in that particular piece of legislation and a lot of the other legislation that we saw, is, there's a shell game in a lot of different things. And if you can't suppose what the right questions are to ask all of the time. And you can't project why costs are rising or what's happening in a particular marketplace, because you are but one person who may have a small slice of expertise, but you're not the all-encompassing expert. And so transparency means I want to see the moving parts so that I can then make better decisions. That's what transparency is not uncovering, not like everybody's a bad actor and trying to get away with something, but just coming to understand systems and how systems work and how things function and why one lever of what is the domino effect, why one thing happens one way, and if there's a different system, why something happens another way, in order to make the best policy.
Yes.
Right.
Lovely.
That's actually, transparency has been a theme in the public workforce system for the last several years as well. And part of the changes that happened with the last shift in the federal law is that data has to be published. It has to be made public. And so if you are a individual and you walk into a workforce center anywhere in Colorado, you can ask them what their outcomes are. And they have to share with you then what are the percentage of the people who come in looking for the jobs who get jobs, and what are the wages they're getting in those jobs. And I think we continue to try to drive that point home with education training programs as well, to really be able to get information to a consumer so they can say, all right, I'm looking for a specific program and I may have 3 options, and I could make this choice based on proximity to my house, perhaps based on price, or I could look at the data on the outcomes to understand what other students have done once they finish this program and how that's impacted their wages and their career trajectories. So I think it's a hugely important issue.
It is, and we all have, it's an opportunity for people to get information, but we also have to make sure that we are letting people know that this information exists in order for them to make those data-driven decisions.
Right.
It's also part of our role to make sure that people know what's available to them and what's out there.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a lot of bills, a lot of topics that you got to play a hand in this past session. What were some of the wins that you would count?
Oh, gosh. There are tons of wins. We had some awesome, incredible behavioral health care wins. We had some awesome, incredible workforce wins. We had a lot of housing wins. We had a lot of healthcare wins. We had, environmental wins. We had, a criminal justice reform. I just can't even begin to tell you the number of bills in the great legislation that I'm really proud that we were able to get passed. And, even when a bill fails, this is my thought, is even when a bill fails, for whatever reasons, it wasn't ready for prime time, it needed some more stakeholder work, whatever the reasons were that a particular piece of legislation fails, in my mind, it just means that it's going to come back in a better form. That the more conversations you have, that oftentimes you'll either find out this is really not going to work, or maybe you have to pare it down, maybe you have to nibble around the edges, maybe you take a big old chunk out of the issue. There's lots of different ways to go at things, and you just learn and you figure out what's going to be the best process. So even when something fails, it's not a negative. There really, there's not a lot of negatives as it relates to getting legislation passed.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, it's definitely a year-round process. And when there are those
Just a little bit.
successes, when the bills are passed and they're signed by the governor, typically there's the signing celebration, which has happened all throughout the end of May and parts of early June as well. And then there's that implementation piece that begins. And often that's when the work transitions from the legislature and the legislative branch over to state agencies and to the executive branch and whoever is named in that bill to be responsible for implementation. What I think is important to know and realize is that rarely does the stakeholder process completely end. And often in the initial stages of implementation for bills, there's the chance to bring together advisory boards and to bring together commissions, and there'll be meetings and conversations. And that's a place for businesses to continuously be involved and to let their voices heard and be known, because that refinement is always necessary, because there's balances. When we think about bills and laws that are good for the economy, there's things that are good for businesses and things that are good for individuals. A lot of times those are mutually beneficial and those are one and the same. Sometimes they can be a little bit at odds with one another. And so we have to work to maintain that balance and understand how we implement programs effectively. And so I think, as you mentioned, the fact that there can be a failure, sometimes that does mean, hey, let's study this in a different way. And we saw that this past session with the bill around family medical leave. That's an idea that we see implemented in several states nationwide. We see need for it to benefit individuals, and I think we're now entering a process where there'll be more study and research done to determine how something like that could work in a way that is workable with employers as well as with those individuals as well. So if Pat were still here, he'd tell you, once that implementation starts, the state agencies are working in partnership with stakeholders and with the legislators to implement those laws with the spirit in which they were written. For you as an individual, Representative Jackson, what happens with you once the session is over?
Well, so there's a couple of different things. There's one thing that is, in order to make good policy, you really have to reconnect with people. And so there's something that I call, and I always have to do the sound effect. I call it the dome suck. And it's like when you're in there, you are, people are like, why don't you take a walk around the block? It's like, I literally cannot go outside. That's how crazy and busy it is. And so you get sort of, it's, just, you get tunnel vision, as it were. And so for me, it's really important to, when the session is over, to get out into community, my own personal community, and throughout the state of Colorado, and talk to people about their lives, real people. So there's that. So there's that reconnection. And then, you heard me mention all kinds of different bills and all kinds of different topics. And so it's hard to be an expert in all of those things. And I wouldn't expect anybody to be an expert in every single subject matter, but you're making decisions that are affecting people's lives. So you better do your due diligence and learn as much as you possibly can about particularly the committees that you sit on. And so healthcare, hey, that's just a little topic, So, let's learn about hospital systems. Let's learn about prescription drugs. Let's learn about.
You also have insurance.
Insurance, thank you. I'm like, what is the other third leg to this stool? Yes, you have the insurance industry. You have Medicaid and Medicare. Any one of those topics is a lot to digest. Mm-hmm. So this is how I spend my time, is going to a lot of conferences, and learning, doing deep dives into subject matter, and that's also a way to come up with really good policy, because you have people out there who are the experts and have done the research and do have a lot of the data points, and so it's a constant just filling your brain in order to make the best decisions that you possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. How would you advise citizens in your district or in other parts of Colorado, or businesses who say they want to get involved in the legislative process? What would you say to them about their role and how they could get involved?
So I have this. I didn't do it very well this year. I try and do these little video snippets, on my phone, and I call it "This House is Your House," because I truly believe that Capitol, and I serve in the House of Representatives, belongs to the people. And so, and part of what that video series is, it's not just to talk about bills I'm running or the actual legislation, but about the process and about that, because that Capitol belongs to them and what happens in that Capitol directly impacts them, that every single person has a right to come down and advocate for themselves, to talk to their legislators, to talk to legislators outside of their district, to come and testify in committee. I spend a lot of time talking to people about it. Can be intimidating and it can be scary, but lawmakers are regular old people, and you should come down and tell people what you think and how you feel, whether I agree with you or other people agree with you or not. This is your state. We are but your representatives. And so I encourage people to come down. I encourage people to reach out and to talk to their lawmakers. I mean, they may not always get the answer that they want, but people should absolutely reach out and come on down. I spend a lot of time, we do a morning prayer every day in the house. We have kids come down and do the Pledge of Allegiance every day. Every single place I go, I say, please come down and do the morning prayer. Please bring your kids down and do the Pledge of Allegiance, because we want to see all of you. So there's just tons of opportunity. It's like shadow a lawmaker, do an internship. I had so many interns this year, and they were all incredible. And it's not about, and ask for what you need out of those internships. Sit down and talk to lobbyists about what their roles are. Lobbyists are not all bad. Sit down and talk to bill drafters. Sit down and talk to communications directors and other policy advisors and spend time with them. That's what I want my interns to do. I want my interns to do research, to go to those stakeholder meetings with me, to invest themselves in policy, to understand how all of this works, whether they want to be in government or not. Just learn about how all of this works.
Great.
That is refreshing to hear 100%. I think there's a little bit of a divide. I as an individual, can I go? Am I welcome? Right? First of all, parking is one issue. I won't get into that. But
Right.
with that being said, it's very rare that I hear from a legislator, please come down, come talk to us. I know that I have a role in my government. I have a duty to make sure that I am a part of my government. But that duty extends beyond voting, well beyond that, right? My voice needs to be heard, and if I don't make that point to go down there, then I'm not really helping and fulfilling my role.
And know that even when, so if I can always remember, it's if you Google Colorado General Assembly, you will find our website. And during session, you can listen to any committee. You can watch what's going on the House floor and listen, of course, and you'll know what bills are coming up, and you'll have an opportunity to come and testify. And guess what? If you can't make it down and you're really interested in a bill, there is this thing called remote testimony. And so we have remote testimony set up at universities across the state. Now, we can't always do it for every bill, but I encourage it. And when I know I'm chairing a committee and I've got a controversial bill coming that I know that a lot of people are going to want to talk about, then I'm going to make sure that there's remote testimony available. And I'm going to spend time in the well on the floor telling everybody in the state of Colorado, sign up and testify and let your voice be heard. You can also write letters. Those are actually entered into the record. It's not like nobody sees it. Those letters are entered into the record. People will know what you think. So, yeah, it's,
Okay.
it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the interns. I'm curious as to where your interns came from.
So my first year, I struggled so hard. I called everybody. It's really hard because we start in January. And so, people are already in school, younger people. I mean, it's really hard to get anybody under the age of 18, although if I could, I would, because I don't care how old you are. Come on down and get involved. So it's really hard just because of the timing for internships. So, but I pepper social media. I ask friends and neighbors. I beg my neighbors, please bring your kids down. Please come down. I don't care if it's once a month that they want to come down, whatever. Mm-hmm. So this year, my aide actually took it upon himself, because he had been an intern the previous year and then became my aide, and he's still working for me. And he took it upon himself, because he was a recent college grad, to talk to all of the community college and the universities across the state and get lots of names and lots of people. And so we had lots of people in our office. And I'm always looking for people from very diverse backgrounds. So I also go to nonprofit groups, and particularly groups that focus on different ethnic communities. I will go to those groups as well. Please, please, please. I want to see people down here that look like the people of the state of Colorado.
Okay, that's fantastic, and we appreciate your willingness to commit to experiential learning, which is one of the values that we espouse and promote within the Colorado Workforce Development Council.
Yeah.
A question for you regarding businesses. Mm-hmm. What do you wish that more businesses knew about the General Assembly or the legislative session, which you think they might not know?
We're not all anti-business. There is sort of this us versus them. I'm a Democrat. And so there tends to be this us versus them kind of thing. And it's like, no, my state wouldn't be doing so great if you weren't here. My kids in my state wouldn't have anything to aspire to if you weren't here. I want you here in every shape and form that you come in. So I wish that sometimes the business community recognize that we're on their side too, and to work with us more. To be, we all have to be open and figure out how to get along when we have differences of opinions, and I have to do that as a lawmaker with somebody from the other side of the aisle, or, just another ideology or value system. And so I'm open. And I'm open to listening. And I would say that the business community might find that people are far more open and far more interested in listening and learning than they might think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. And I'll just note, Alex, the CWDC is very bipartisan in the work that we do. The way that our bylaws are set up is that we always have representatives appointed by both the majority side and the minority side in both the House and the Senate. And so it's great for the conversations around workforce and what we need to see moving forward in our state.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying that this is a fact. I'm just saying it's a perception.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely. We are bipartisan as well, for the record, for all of us, so we all know. Thank you both very much. This was a great conversation. I love hearing more about getting involved in the government, and I love the relationship that you have internship-wise, and that you are looking for more people to join internships. I know that's big for workforce development. It's how I got where I am today. Internship. Highly recommend it.
It's the best way to learn, and I would say, in January or before January, because we, around November, December, if you're interested, send your resume in to the Colorado House of Representatives and try and come on over and see what we do out down there.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. Again, be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. You can find more information in the description below. Please click on that link and you can get the episode of This House is Your House, as well as more information about the Colorado Workforce Development Council. So thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.